Hey most amazing fam, it's Abby and we are going straight into it today because these stories can get pretty long. Here are top 10 scary stories of people who lived in haunted houses. At number 10, we have a UK family home. So Nye, 75, was just a child when her family moved from the US to the UK. In the UK, the family bought an old house. Like, still had lead pipes for water, type of old. So they were only 6, but they do remember their experiences. They saw bright lights in the corner of rooms at night, and they heard footsteps on floorboards, even though they had carpeted flooring. Nye, 75, would be woken up by a little girl at night that danced on their dresser. They themselves were terrified. Now they had workmen working on the house to update it that had odd experiences too. They had tools being moved and the feeling of being watched. The scariest event at the house was when Nye, 75's sister's friend came over for a sleepover. She woke the whole house screaming, saying a little girl came into her room and pulled her from her bed. She refused to ever come back. Nye, 75 said they fixed the problem by acknowledging the ghosts and treating them like family. Just kind of walking in and being, "Hello, how are you all doing today?" to an empty house. Just like I do. At number 9, shadows through doors. So this story comes from Denholm 2. When they were around 9 or 10 years old, they lived with their dad in an old house. It was a large house from the 1800s. Every once in a while they would hear footsteps or voices, and one night it got even scarier. Only they and their dad was home, and they woke up to the door of their room just wide open. And it wasn't usually open, they kept it just fully shut. So they shifted their attention to the end of their bed and saw a large shadow-like figure watching them from the end of the bed. It was around 7 feet tall. Now, they say when the figure noticed them seeing it, it melted into the floor and the door slammed shut. They, after this, felt traumatized. Now, when they asked their dad if he went into their room because maybe this could be a trick of the light, he denied it. They said their dad is not a man for jokes too. Number 8, the maid of the house. So this next one is from Reddit user Twigsnapper's uncle. So the uncle's house was supposedly haunted by the stableman and maid of the family that used to own it. The uncle had a friend and the friend of that friend stay over one time. The friend of a friend saw a maid bringing towels downstairs when she was waking up and then again bringing a percolator down. So at that point, she was just impressed by the uncle hiring staff as he was a neurologist with a habit of spending just a little extra. But then when she went downstairs to see the uncle and friend chatting at the table, she asked where the maid was. She figured the maid was just making breakfast, but after the uncle figured out who she was talking about, he pointed out a picture. She said, "That was the maid, like that's the picture, where is she?" And he laughed and said that she had been dead for 100 years. That was the maid that haunted the house. On to number 7, a scary experience with a friendly ghost. So back when user Toenail Collector was a teen, their family was remodeling an old house. They were working on their truck that was only supported by a jack at the time, which they point out is not smart. At the moment they had no reason to get out from under the vehicle, but they suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to get out from under it. Barely a moment passed after they moved out from under it and the jack slipped and the truck fell to the ground. If they were still under the truck, bad news. So it freaked out their dad since he thought they were under it, but the haunting part comes from their mom's reaction. They told her, and she just started weeping, since the previous owner had died in the driveway. So maybe the mysterious force that made them feel like they needed to leave underneath the truck was the previous owner. On to number 6, a knock upon the door. Redditor Weathercrow said they had a bunch of different experiences, but I'll stick to one story they said. Weathercrow said they had a reoccurring incident. They kept hearing voices of family members that just weren't home. So this could be in the form of hearing their parents fighting, or their brother and their parents fighting, but it would always be on a different floor from them, downstairs when they were upstairs and vice versa. They had one experience where it happened on the same floor and it was very close to them. They were brushing their teeth with the bathroom door shut. There was a knock on the door and their dad saying their name in a teasing voice. But they opened the door and he wasn't there. Plus they went to talk to their mom and she said he had gone to work hours ago. Then right after they shut the door they heard more knocking and didn't open the door again, which is good for them, because I wouldn't. That's just creepy. Number 5, haunted college house. So Munchies lived at an old haunted college house that was so creepy that everyone moved out except them and one roommate. He had quite the highlight reel of experiences there. He only ever had sleep paralysis in that house of anywhere he had ever slept. Plus, if something happened, it would smell like strong, flowery, old lady style perfume if it was a strange experience. And then he had 2 different experiences at 3 a.m. First, he woke up at 3 a.m. because his roommate's door kept opening and slamming shut, and he yelled at his roommate to stop it, and it did. But he remembered he was the only one home that weekend. So who was making the noise? Who knows? Then, the beads he had hanging outside his door began to swing violently but synchronized against his door frame. At that point, he just curled up into fetal position until it stopped about half an hour later. Then the next time he woke up at 3 a.m., it was because he heard someone playing Nintendo really loud. Thinking it was another college kid playing on their Nintendo system who just broke in, he took a bat and walked towards where the Nintendo was kept in the house. It kept getting louder and louder as he approached. Once he opened the door to that room, it was completely quiet. Even though, moments ago, it was loud enough to wake him up. But let's move on. Number 4. T-Ghost. In Reddit user Signal Fire's house in New Jersey, they had their own 3 a.m. experience. They woke up at 3 a.m. after falling asleep on their couch. They could hear a noise getting louder and louder. They turned to see their kettle boiling all on its own. They said their kettle has a button that you push down and it glows blue, and they could see that the button had been pressed. But they didn't do it, and they didn't live with anyone else. With it being the middle of the night, when you may have a foggy head, they said out loud, "But I don't want tea or coffee." And then the kettle just clicked right off. And then right after, they wrote that they felt guilty as if it was a friendly ghost making an offer and they just refused it. Which I would feel the same. So this happened again during the day with a friend present, and Signal Fire felt relieved it wasn't all in their head. And then again later at night, the kettle went off around 4 a.m. and they yelled out, "Please stop boiling the kettle, we have people asleep upstairs," and it clicked off again. And at this point they say, okay, maybe it's a coincidence the kettle is a bit off, but with it happening 3 times, do you really think so? Let's move to number 3, what's in the attic. So Redditor economy_cactus refused to go upstairs in their house by the time they were about 8. They were exploring the attic-like closets that were up there with a friend when they were young, when they had kind of a creepy experience. They were crawling across the space and they saw a blonde girl sitting in the corner. They said she seemed friendly, silent, and she was wearing a nice dress. But they said they were beyond terrified and left the closet. After that experience, they avoided the closets, but every once in a while, lost toys would turn up in there. The doors would swing open if they went up to grab something, and it just kind of creeped them out. They tried to take their dog up there once to take on the monster, and the dog just didn't want to go. So when they moved out, when they were about 10, it was less than a week before the next family that moved in called. They asked the family if that house was haunted because their daughter was saying that she plays with a blonde-haired girl at night. Just like the one they described. Number 2, what's in the corner? So Finn Cobb's wife and him moved into their great-aunt's old home that was built in the 50s. There were some strange and creepy things happening for a bit, but nothing totally untowards. Then, after his aunt passed away, things started getting more strange. His son would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning crying. The cat would go into his room and stare at the top corner of his wall. The dogs would growl outside the door. And yes, this is not too off, but then it got worse. They were watching their nephew and he was in their son's room, giggling. The nephew was pointing at the same top corner and just creepy giggling. Then his son began to say things like, "I don't want to go to bed, he gets mad," or "the shadow went over there." And at that point, Finn Cobb was feeling more and more of a presence he couldn't really explain. Then he was woken up 4 nights in a row by his fire alarm going off at 3:01 a.m. And it would only go off for 3 times and then stop. And then shortly after all this, they were creeped out enough that they moved to another house and they were all sleeping better at that point. Last but not least, number 1, Mr. Longneck. So Ambren on Reddit lives in a house that was built in the 20s. Her toddler daughter began pointing out the actions of a figure she saw in 2017. In the first instance, her daughter was 2 and pointed across the room asking who that guy was. Her daughter said he was hiding, but there was no one there. But again and again, this figure popped up in a conversation over the next couple months, but it was kind of more so joked about as that guy. But then in early 2018, around sleep time, another figure was possibly brought into play. While her daughter was about to go to sleep beside her mom, she said, "It's just me and you and him and her." And so not only that guy, him, but also her. Who's her? But then, moving on in the timeline, a name was said. Mr. Longneck. And so the daughter had a fixation with necks because she was about 2 or 3 and some people do that, so that may have been a factor, but Ambren decided she would ask some more questions about Mr. Longneck, figure out some details about what her daughter was talking about. So here it is. He is a grown-up, he is nice but scary and wears a monster clothes and a hat. He comes to the house in the afternoon, he knocks on the patio door and walks through the kitchen. Sometimes he brings a friend, the her from earlier, a little girl with yellow hair. Whenever Ambren's daughter talks about it, she isn't scared, but the family has saged the house just in case, because if you try to imagine a figure with just a long neck, it can kind of come across really creepy when they've been hanging out with your toddler daughter for a while. But that is all I have for you today, folks. That was top 10 scary stories of people who lived in haunted houses, and let me know what you think in the comments below. And while you're down there, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and ring that bell to be notified when all of our videos go up. I've been your host, Abby, and until next time, have a good one.